So Jess, you're finally here. It's the end of the month, but you're here. You're here, and this is the movie that I know you were the most excited to talk about, more than likely. So
I mean, it's the movie I had seen.
That's fair. That's fair.
Out of all the ones that I had picked.
I will say, in all seriousness, this was a pretty good month. You did a really good job programming the month.
You know,
Night Dreams.
I play God. I show up on one episode. We do good.
Yeah. No, I joked with you about this offline. Whenever someone is given the opportunity to program a month, I always give them the opportunity to not show up. Jess is the only person who exercises that, and I do appreciate mixing it up. But on this episode of the Culture Cast, I am still your host, Chris Dashu, much to the chagrin of many, and I am joined by Jess Byard of Scary Stories We Tell, not striking, because we're not part of the WGA or the SGA or the SAG, so you can mention the things you work
or
on.
the AMPT, whatever.
Yeah, we're not part of any of those groups. Jess Byard's here.
Hello.
And also here, because I know they really wanted to talk about this movie too, and I will say this about you, Maggie. You have Jonathan Pryce energy, big time.
Yay, thank you.
Take that how you will. But if you've listened to Scary Stories We Tell, you have heard them here before. Your friend and mine, Maggie the Odd.
Hey, gang, welcome back.
I don't know if they ever left.
Oh, good. Okay, well, snacks are on their way. Don't panic, and we'll give you your phones back later.
But on this episode of the Culture Cast, we are going to be talking about 1985's rendition of 1984, directed by Terry Gilliam, aptly titled, titled Brazil.
From Terry Gilliam, director of Time Bandits, Brazil. Voted Best Picture by the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. Time magazine says a terrific movie, one of the 10 best of the year. A remarkable accomplishment. The New York Times. Brazil is as good as they come. USA Today. Starring Jonathan Pryce, Robert De Niro, and Katherine Hellman.
We're all in it together, kid.
Rated R.
Now in select areas. Check newspapers.
It's titled Brazil, but it should have been titled 1985. The film is directed by Terry Gilliam, based on a screenplay by Terry Gilliam, Tom Stoppard, and Charles McCowan, and it stars the aforementioned Jonathan Pryce as Sam Laurie, a man who lives in a dystopian retro future society where, just like our society, shit can go awry at the press of a button, or bugs in the system. This time, literal bugs. A literal bug gets in the system and throws his entire life up in the air. He becomes a terrorist, possibly. He meets terrorists, possibly, and he loses his mind. Genuinely. We will be spoiling the movie. The movie is from 1985, so if that's not long enough for you to not know about spoilers, sorry. But yeah, we'll be spoiling the movie. I will say it's probably a movie you should watch. I think we would all agree in that sentiment. It's a movie worth enjoying blind one time.
And I would say spoiling a movie like Brazil still really isn't spoiling the movie.
No, it is so lush with imagery that even if you read a transcript, you would be missing so much genuine characters and everything.
Well, and I mean, it's, again, if you know anything about movies and you see the name Terry Gilliam and you go, I can read the synopsis, it's like, boy, you really don't know anything about movies, because Terry Gilliam is, I mean, look, Terry, well, I'm sure we'll talk all about Terry Gilliam, but Jess, I'm going to turn over to you first. It is Jess Byard July, and we are putting a cap on it. So why are we watching Brazil? When was the first time you saw it? And what did you think rewatching it for this episode of the Culture Cast?
So why are we watching Brazil is the first question. Ultimately, because I know there are some other people out there that like to program the months with none of the big name in specific genre. But I always like to throw one in that people are familiar with, because I think people like to listen to things that they've seen occasionally. So that's why. When was the first time I saw it? I want to say probably high school. Just when I was going through, just the stage of devouring any kind of weird, fringy, horror adjacent, sci-fi adjacent, whatever type of movies that I could get my hands on. And then I saw it one or two times after that, maybe. And what did I think rewatching it? You know, it is a fun visual sensory experience minus the bugs. I had forgotten the bugs majorly. And I have evidently grown more unhappy with bugs as I've gotten older. So that wasn't great. But I mean, it's a Terry Gilliam film. It's fun. Is it my favorite Terry Gilliam? No. But it is worth a watch. It's an experience of a movie, I think, is what we can say about it. Ultimately, yes, it is 1984. So if you know the basic gist of 1984, that's your loose framework that you have for this movie. But otherwise, it's just a sensory experience.
Maggie, same questions to you, other than technically the first one.
Oh, well, fair enough.
But I mean, to be fair, why? I mean, I know you love this.
Why did you agree to be on this?
Yeah, I know you love this movie. So, I mean.
Yes. Well, in general, Terry Gilliam, once again, coming from the animation standpoint, that's been like a family, like in my family, that name gets thrown around. We had Time Bandits on Betamax that I would watch when I was like a young little critter. And then just growing up, I got more and more exposed to it. Obviously, his work that he did with Monty Python and all of those animated things. And so that was just a name that I actively sought out. And considering this is like the big name for him, like it's what people kind of say is like the crown jewel. Personally, I still think that's Time Bandits, but that's just me. But so this one I actually sought out when I would be going to the library every weekend and just picking up a boatload of VHS and just watching them. And that was a treat. I was maybe in like early junior high, super duper early high school. And it was just really cool to kind of get that surrealist movement through the scope of video, because I mean, I'm now revisiting it through the art like world. And it's just wild to see that kind of scope put on something different, like different media and everything like that. It's fantastic. It truly is. And having a nice retelling of A Dismal Tale, making it comedically dismal, is just a treat. I love that. That is my brain goo. I eat this movie for breakfast.
So in terms of Terry Gilliam, I am to say I'm a fan. I mean, he doesn't have enough movies to really be like, I'm a huge fan of Terry Gilliam. Like, he's made a handful of things. And again, like, I think they're all so varied that he is within each of them. But after a certain point, it stops being this kind of thing and it starts being something else. My favorite Terry Gilliam, at least of the things I've seen, is still Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But that's also because it's like, I mean, we covered it earlier this year. Like, it's not the story of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas at all. It's a Terry Gilliam thing entirely, but that's okay. Because Hunter S. Thompson through the lens of Terry Gilliam is like acid through the lens of LSD. It's like two things that amplify the insanity of one another. And that's what makes that great. However, this is really George Orwell through the lens of Terry Gilliam. And what's actually fucking insane for me about this movie is the only reason this movie is called Brazil is because you can't call it 1984. Because it's really just the story. It is almost in a lot of ways beat for beat the story of 1984, at least the broad strokes. But it's seeing the comedy, quote unquote, in it that makes it quote unquote more palatable. What's funny is earlier this year, during, I guess it would have been March, whenever we covered Fear and Loathing, we were supposed to do 1984 because it was books to screen. And it was, you have to read the book, but then we'll talk about the movie as well. And that month kind of went to shit. It's fine. It happens. Sometimes it's only 1 month a year, which is better than all of them. But we didn't get to cover 1984, but I'm glad that we ended up covering this in lieu of that, because this is the movie that, and this is the story I would personally rather hear from 1984, because this for me feels more like an interesting conversation to be had. Because 1984, for as good as it is, just don't get me wrong, it is great. And what it's getting at is important, and what it's talking about needs to be discussed, unless it happens in real life or unless it already has. Right.
Oh, you die in the book, you die in real life, guys.
Yeah. But the problem is I feel like the story of 1984 for me is just not that entertaining. Like it's very cut and dry. It's very methodical.
It's very British.
Right. but like in a way that's like not Tom Stoppard or, not fun British. It's
the stiff upper lip, keep calm, carry on.
Yeah. And like, that's fine, I guess, but that doesn't resonate with me. And look, again, like I'm sitting here and I'm 100% conceding that this movie does not exist and is probably not even half as good without something. It doesn't exist without 1984, the story, right? Like that set the framework. But this is such a fun riff on that story, and in such a, again, Terry Gilliam, British humor, Monty Python way, whatever you want to call whatever Terry Gilliam brought to that group of people, because that's the thing. I mean, to talk about Terry Gilliam is to talk about Monty Python. And like you mentioned, Maggie, all of the artwork is Terry Gilliam. Like, right? Yes. Like that's all Terry Gilliam, which he has obviously echoed in everything he's ever made is stylistically unique, sometimes verging on bizarre, unsettling, whatever you want to call it.
It's absurdist art, and it's wonderful.
Right. But again, like the intention for some people is going to be, this, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be the best thing for everybody. And that's the thing about Terry Gilliam. And, if you look into the history behind this movie, which there's books, full-length feature documentaries even.
Yep. That real nice Criterion Collection release.
Which here's the funny thing. To talk about the movie, to talk to the movie specifically, I had never seen this movie before.
Ooh. That's the other reason I picked it. I knew there was another reason I picked it, because you had not seen it yet.
It's true.
This is the same reason I picked Cuckoo's Nest. See, there's something to be said.
We're helping you.
We're helping you. Well, and again, I think to your point, to both of your points, I think that this could be considered Terry Gilliam's finest work. And I don't think that's an unfair assessment. I think it's not his most original work, but to be fair, like Terry Gilliam's most original work, that's Time Bandits, right? Like
it would be very close. That was one of his earlier works, and it still follows
pretty
a frame.
George Orwell-y.
Between that and Gulliver's Travels, it was an amalgamation of a lot of things. But I think the beauty of Terry Gilliam is, just like his animation, it is collage. It is taking materials that have already been around, hacking them to pieces, slapping them together, letting them move and kind of free range and exist on their own. And it becomes this kind of weird landscape full of weirder creatures. And I think that's the beauty that he brings to this is, it's a story we know, but have you seen, I don't know, the walls explode? Have you seen... flying? Have you seen a giant? A giant with a boat on his head? I don't know, but you're gonna see it here.
Well, and that is the other thing. And I was thinking about it. It's very Burroughs-esque, and I kind of don't know how Gilliam wasn't the one to do Naked Lunch. Like for me, that it was. Okay, Cronenberg. Sure.
I was gonna say David Cronenberg's a pretty.
But also, like, you could make the case Terry Gilliam is just as good or better, given how he did Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, because that's an equally hard to adapt book.
It depends on the tone you want, because like we were saying, like with Brazil versus what 1984, like the book, and the, original film adaptation is, it's very dystopian, dour, gloomy, blah. And I think, depending on what tone you wanted for Naked Lunch, I think Terry Gilliam would have brought that sort of humor out like he brings, in Brazil. But Cronenberg brought out the more serious, really true, like body horror aspect. I think that it
was also very meta, which is Cronenberg, right? Like the meta thing is Cronenberg. I mean, Gilliam does it, but I more attribute it to, fucking Videodrome is all about meta. And having the meta conversation like that. I don't know, like Gilliam is in that conversation, but Cronenberg, but that's the thing. Like Naked Lunch is not a meta commentary. Like they did that because it's ultimately really an unfucking adaptable book. Book is a fucking loose term even. Like there's not a narrative there.
Definitely more of a think piece and kind of like a mental maze because it just exists on a couple different timelines.
I like to get high and read Naked Lunch. That's what I do because that's the only way to fully appreciate it. Like, well, it's not about focusing on one singular thing. And that I think is probably the thing about Brazil that clearly tripped the studios up is it's not a studio story.
No.
And the only reason the ending in 1984 doesn't get railroaded out of existence is because that's the ending of the book, and the book is highly respected, and you don't change the ending of 1984 the book.
No, that defeats the purpose.
Oh boy, would that be a statement though?
Right, but that's the fucking.
It was fine.
But that's the insanity here. Is like Sid Sheinberg is like, hey, no, seriously, it's just about the length of the movie, and it's like, okay, I can actually concede because look, obviously the whole Battle for Brazil thing is a big deal. Like you mentioned, Jess, I own the Criterion Collection. I owned it for 20 fucking years at this point before I ever saw the movie, but I own that crazy triple disc set. Yeah. And it has this documentary, which you can find on YouTube and in the show notes. And this documentary feature talks about the entire fuckaroo that was getting the movie from director's editing cut to release. And Sid Sheinberg goes, well, the movie's too long. You got to keep it under 2 hours. And whatever you do under 2 hours, do whatever you want. Like, but it ends up turning out. It feels less like that's really what was going on, and more that's just the excuse to give so that you have to have this happy ending. And look, I would concede that the movie is probably 20 minutes too long. There are parts of this movie that drag on, namely in like the end of the second act, beginning of the third act, kind of is just ponderous. But there's how you could watch this movie or know this basic skeleton of a story and think, yeah, this is going to have a positive or happy ending or uplifting ending is actually fucking mind blowing. Like to me, it's like, what the fuck were you watching?
Right. It's like the happy version of Watership Down. It's like, no.
Everybody's cool. The rabbits, nobody got hurt.
They got to point B, and that was kind of the tongue-in-cheek for the end of this movie. Sorry, spoilers. It's the most happy ending you could possibly think for this character after going through everything and actually having enough heart to sympathize with all of these characters throughout this whack-ass journey and being privileged in life. Like, of course, the good ones never fucking win. And it's the same dismal message, but I mean, once again, it was fun and festive, and the song will always get stuck in your head.
And it's a Christmas movie, right?
Yeah.
Technically, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
It has a chunk in Christmas.
No. The qualifier is if Christmas is a part of the plot.
Yeah, but nobody uses that for fucking Die Hard. So
I do.
I do, you and I do, but I'm saying we're using the loose horseshit rules that everybody else uses. Because why are we being so strict when no one else wants to be? They want to put their Die Hard in there, then we can put Brazil. Like what? You know what I mean? Like
it's in league with Nightmare Before Christmas, where it's just 50-50.
But Christmas drives that entire plot.
All right, fine.
So does Gremlins.
Okay, well, yes. You're an absolute
Everybody forgets about Gremlins, and they want to argue about Die Hard, but they forget about Gremlins. That's what it feels like. No, I mean, look, I was merely joking. I mean, they mentioned Christmas only because the gag of the gift that he keeps getting and receiving. But yeah, it is. To me, it's like someone watching Bridge to Terabithia and being like, the girl can't die. Like, like then there's no message to be like learned. There's nothing here that, I mean, again, you can have something for entertainment's sake. And I'm not saying Brazil isn't entertaining, but Terry Gilliam's doing something else as well. And to do that other thing, the movie's not going to have an uplifting ending because that's kind of the narrative point. And for Sid Sheinberg to come in and try to like kneecap the movie again under the pretense of the movie's too long, like it's insane to me because the Love Conquers All cut is whack with a capital W, but it's also an interesting like. To listen to Terry Gilliam talk about it in that documentary, he's like, I don't care that it exists. You get to see what they fucking thought was a good idea. and watch my movie. Do you need a comparison? And I as much as Terry Gilliam's kind of fucked himself up recently by being the I can't be funny because cancel culture guy now, which whatever, bro. I agree with that sentiment of like, you know what? If you think that your version is better, then both can exist. How's that?
Bingo.
Right.
Because nobody goes to bat for the Love Conquers All version of this movie. Like,
no,
it's fucking bad. It's fucking bad.
It's rough. It's real rough and really unrewarding after sitting through 2.5 hours worth of buildup just for the last half to be bullshit.
Well, and what's strange is they take things out that would make sense to be left in, like all of the dream sequence stuff is taken out because it doesn't make any sense, but it makes perfect sense. It's just there's negative portions of it that don't jibe with the Love Conquers All. It's just like I don't know how they thought it earned a happy ending. It would come out of left field and you'd be like, there's got to be an alternate version of this.
Because it was 1985 and the blockbuster and family movies were ruling everything then.
But it's crazy because you watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail, a movie that made a fair amount of money, and I would contend that movie didn't have an uplifting ending. It has like a weird anti-ending, like anti-climax in a lot of ways. Like I know people don't feel like the ending of that movie is something of value. I've heard people complain about it, as I'm sure we all have.
Really? I fucking adore the fact that they just left it as brutally realistic as possible.
That's me and you. But that's me and you, like a normal movie watcher who's watching it for like the coconuts and the knights who say knee. Like the ending of Monty Python and the Holy Grail is pretty subversive, right? Like, because all of a sudden it's a movie, and like all of a sudden this is like metatextual, and they're actors playing characters who murdered someone for real, apparently.
Right. That's Monty Python. That's like the most Monty Python that movie was, honestly.
Right.
That.
But my point is, like, that's not an uplifting ending, but it made a fair amount of money. And to me, it was like the thing that you want out of this movie is an uplifting ending. Like what you would want from people is for them to appreciate the journey that they're taking on. But to your point, Jess, you can't have a downer. You can't send people out on a low note because then I guess they feel like they didn't get their money's worth. I mean, again, like that's the thing. I don't think that this movie on the face of it ever had any like real financial viability.
No, I mean, this movie exists. It benefited from existing in a time where pretty much anything was still able to be made and released somewhere, even if it was just a handful of theaters, because not everything was a multi-million-dollar budget at that point in time. But I feel like it was a movie that was, obviously based on a story from a very different time period, different time period when the book was written. And Terry Gilliam is, also from that past sort of time. It feels like it's a movie from the 70s, essentially, that came out in 1985. Like it feels like if it had come out, maybe 10 years earlier, it might have like it could have ended on that sour note and like people have been like, yes, okay, I get this. But I think in the 80s, once we hit that very commercial mall poppy, everybody, merchandising, like how do you merchandise Brazil?
Right. Brazil 2, the search for more money.
Right.
I mean, to your point, though, like the idea that, because we did an episode on it earlier in the year, we did an episode on Soylent Green. And like that movie ostensibly ends with spoilers, just like this is the spoiler episode, folks. Spoil everything, you motherfucker.
You're going to learn today.
In that movie, effectively, Charlton Heston dies at the end. And he like is being carried out on like a group of people. I guess he's being carried out by like an ambulance team, and he's screaming, Soylent Green is made of people. Soylent Green is made of people. But he's dead. Like he's been shot as many times as let's keep the spoiler train going. As many times as James Bond died, it was shot in the new movie where he died. Fuck, that's mean. That's way too recent. We'll bleep that part out.
That's an early one.
That's 2022. I have overdone it.
But that's what I'm saying. The 70s and the 80s, like very different messages come from movies. I think the 80s was very much that birth of I'm just going to go to the movies for some popcorn entertainment and then I'm going to go home. Versus in the 70s, there was a large group of filmmakers that were out there making movies as statement pieces, you know, incorporating these in the 60s and 70s and warning us of like, you know, environmental things and governmental things and societal things and everything like that. And then we hit the 80s and everyone said, well, clearly no one's listening. So let's just get some cocaine and bright colors.
And the fucking crazy thing is, to your point, this movie has the setting of the Tim Burton Batman movies.
It really does.
But none of the action and those movies, I mean, the action in those movies, for those of you that love those movies like I do, there's not a lot of what we would call action of today, but there's action of the time. And it's fun. It's fine. It's not Bruce Wayne jumping out of the Batwing and fighting General Zod on a battlefield with Supergirl and two versions of the Flash. It's not that. You're right, Michael Keaton, who thought that was a thing that we needed to see, and we did see it, and it's now come out. But that's my point. Like, that movie and this setting work better together than anything else, but this movie is not interested in telling that action movie story or that like that story that you would expect from a movie set in this kind of playground of things. I mean, even Blade Runner is like utilizes similar settings that this movie does, and it has more of an action story, but even it fell short for people because, again, like, these things end up influencing things, but they are not successful initially on their own. They're not commercially viable, clearly, which is fine because that's not the story they want to tell. Jonathan Pryce is not jumping around in spandex in this movie. Well, wait. Well, I mean, there is that whole thing where he's in his dreams. So
true.
I mean, yeah.
I fucking love Jonathan Pryce. Can we have a frank discussion about Jonathan Pryce?
Yeah, we can totally gush about Mr. Pryce. He is a fab little guy.
I've been watching a lot of James Bond movies recently, and he's in Tomorrow Never Die, and he's so fucking good in that movie. And I know that movie has its detractors because he's playing a very big character. He's playing big Rupert Murdoch, like big as in a big personality. And it totally works, and he's really over the top, and it's it's a lot of the things that I kind of associate him with now, which is like he's an actor's actor. And you listen to stories about when he was on set on Tomorrow Never Dies, and he was, he would walk around with no shoes on just to see what people's reactions were. And it's like, this fucking guy. Like, but like, this is the kind of thing where it's like, this guy excels in this role because he is that kind of act. And he's perfect in this movie. I'm glad that this movie exists, if for no other reason than because it's a Jonathan Pryce top build movie. Like, it's a big budget Jonathan Pryce movie, which is literally not a thing that should exist realistically.
But no, he is absolutely wonderful in this role, because if you think about it, it is like a whole slew of like these side characters that are so zany and whatever, but it takes great care to build like the one person that you're paying attention to wholeheartedly as like not only like the vehicle for you and him are going on this ride. It's just such a strange role to try and cast, and having somebody like him playing that, you get all the minutia of what emotions and thoughts he's thinking without spelling it out like movies now. So it was really I agree. This was a fantastic choice, and he definitely has skill. It's like people who slept on Rowan Atkinson just because he was Mr. Bean. It's like, nah, they got chops. They can come out swinging.
And that's the other thing. Like, I'm used to Jonathan Pryce like having like some range, and he does have range in this role, but to be fair, he's not really being asked to do much. Like, that's kind of the point, is him being the everyman. And like you mentioned, Maggie, there's so much of everything else with Robert De Niro, and Robert De Niro's in this fucking movie. Yeah. Bob Hoskins. Oh my God!
Everyone's in this movie.
Jim Broadbent is in this movie. Like Catherine Hellman, who plays Jonathan Pryce's mom. Like, there's a lot going on, and like you said, Maggie, there's a lot of big characters. But Jonathan Pryce playing the everyman perfectly is is what grounds this movie in the reality that ultimately it needs to be grounded in, because like we've kind of already mentioned, there is a big twist at the end of this movie. And the big twist at the end of this movie is he doesn't get away. He has been fucking lobotomized. 2 lobotomy movies in a row, Jess Byer.
I know.
Right?
That was the real theme.
Right. But what's fucked up is, and because again, in 1984, he's not lobotomized so much. And I guess we don't know if he's lobotomized here. It's more or less hinted at that he is, because he goes, this is a professional relationship. I assume the next thing that happens is boom, by lobotomized.
Yeah.
But you've retreated into your mind at that point, and that's when the movie diverges from reality. And you know what? Like, I'm perfectly okay with that. Because again, like I don't feel like it's not obvious.
I agree.
Because, like, there's a lot of shit going on that's very weird. And it's like, yes, this has been weird, but all of a sudden it's like unreality, complete unreality. Like when Robert De Niro's character just disappears into a pile of paperwork.
Yes.
Yep.
Which is like on the nose, but that's a break from the reality that the movie has already established, because the movie's rooted in a reality of this retro futurism. It's not without a base reality, clearly.
It's just, ooh boy, that reality is probably not very, very pleasant at all.
But it's designed really well.
I mean, I love the oh gosh, where he works with all of the like old school machines, just billions of them going on. I would love to walk through that building once or twice before I get like sensory overload.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. I would definitely crumble into a pile of paperwork myself, but it's just so lush. I love all of the storm glass. I love the fucking like solitary elevators, the piping in all of the fucking houses. Like the first thing you see is an advert about the colored ducks, and it's like, yeah. That's similar to where we are.
It kind of is.
That'd be nice.
Well, and to your point, I mean, the design of everything is, I mean, Terry Gilliam, right? Like he gets it. But it does feel like when I watch it, I'm just like, this is just taking place in that universe that George Orwell built.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's no way it doesn't just feel like it. And I'm kind of, I don't know, like, again, I keep mentioning this idea. And again, the filmmakers understood it when the original title of this movie was 1984 and a half. But it's not it's not a parody, but it
Which
almost
is definitely what that sounds like.
Right. Yeah, it's like a Naked Gun movie, for fuck's sake.
Thank you.
Right. But at times when it really is, it's humming along, it does feel like a parody, but almost, I mean, it's satire, because it is saying the exact same thing. The message is identical.
Right. And I mean, the line between satire and parody. Yeah, geez. The line between satire and parody is so fine. It just depends on who's telling that story. And I think that Terry Gilliam, given his penchant for cheeky humor and things like that, it does come off. It's not a parody, but at times feels a little bit in that vein, but it still is telling a pretty serious message and ends on a pretty serious note. So I would definitely hesitate to call it a parody, because I think a parody in general is like all in good fun. Everything's, exaggerated and goofy, but satire, yeah, I feel like that's where this still lives. And I mean, that makes sense because it still is the story of 1984, which is also satire. And I mean, any amount of Twilight Zone episodes and, all of that from that time period, things that, Terry Gilliam was inspired by, I see that translating here. I do find it odd. I mean, I guess I don't find it odd that it came out in 1985, given that,
why wouldn't you?
It's 1984.
Right. It does feel a little on the nose.
Exactly. Yeah. That was intentional. Yes. To have it come out then.
It doesn't seem like it, but
No.
like, I mean, it's not like I can't tell. Anything I saw, it just seemed like that was just, that's when Terry, I mean, look, it's good timing, right? If anything, it's good timing.
Right.
Yeah.
And look, it's mentioned.
Marketing.
Yeah, right. And it's mentioned, I mean, references in film on Wikipedia mentions that Brazil heavily draws from 1984. But you're right. I mean, it being a satire, it's not a funny movie. I mean, there's very little about it that's like humorous. It's a black comedy. It's darkly
Very.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, I mean, again, like it feels tenuous at best because it's again, the story of 1984 is not funny.
No.
Welcome to it.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like the story of Brazil is not funny because it's literally the same story. Instead of there being one female character that is, in cahoots with Winston, it's a female character and Robert De Niro as well, who, by the way, can we just talk about Robert De Niro? He is unneeded in this movie.
Yeah. That's
God,
why
seriously.
he turns into a pile of paperwork. They're like, you know what? Oops. Bye.
He poochied himself.
Yeah, he fucking did.
Yep.
I mean, again, like the metaphor is on point. I understand, like, I watched some videos and I watched the Eastern European kind of social philosopher Slavoj Žižek was talking about this movie. And he's like, the person is, able to complete things and the bureaucracy doesn't like that because it can do what the bureaucracy can't, which is, fend for itself. And I mean, that's what he represents, right? He shows up, he fixes his AC unit and he's like, hey, they're not going to fucking do shit for you, man. Like you're toast. And he knows that. I mean, he calls them and he doesn't hear anything. They're like, we don't have enough people. So you're fucked. But it, like when he disappears, it feels like that's the conclusion of that entire storyline and it works. But the problem is it's Robert De Niro and it's distracting because it's Robert De Niro. Like I can't get around the fact that it's Robert De Niro and it's like,
I agree. I had a hard time with that too, especially like on the most recent rewatch of just like, he just stands out. He is Robert De Niro no matter what he is doing. And like you said, his character is pretty unnecessary, but he's still just taking away from the screen every time he's on.
Yeah, he is needed, but he's not. Like you could
have taken his aspects and lumped them into
the female
any
character.
other Bob Hosk, any of the other, antagonistic sort of characters or foils or whatever that were there.
Or the female character, because I mean, again, he's really just a bifurcation of that character from 1984. Because again, 1984, Winston has that female character. In this, he has the female character, but also it's not actually her. She is also being kind of mislabeled. She sympathizes with the quote terrorists unquote, but she is not one the way Robert De Niro is. It feels unnecessary, and he's just. The problem is he's a bigger star than Jonathan Pryce is. Always, especially in 1985 he is. But I mean, look, Jonathan Pryce is a well-known actor. That's not up for question. He's a fantastic actor. That's not up for question. But when he's opposite Robert De Niro,
it's a different gravitas.
Correct.
Well, I mean, a mainstream audience is going to be like, why weren't we with Robert De Niro the whole time?
Yes.
Not Jonathan Pryce. Which again, like, go ahead. Valid point, I guess. Like,
yeah.
But Jonathan Pryce is so good. It's like, I don't need Robert De Niro in this movie at all.
Well, essentially, if we followed the Robert De Niro character, we're just getting like another Taxi Driver-ish story, right? Like it's just like a person that is probably going to, try and assassinate somebody at some point, and that's just
right.
We just get surreal Taxi Driver.
And I'm with you. It's like it's more interesting to tell the story of the everyman caught in the cogs of the system. Because again, I mean, this guy works in information retrieval initially with Ian Holm, who there is at one point when you first see him where I thought he's channeling Rowan Atkinson, and it's like hardcore. You're like, well, if Mr. Lowry, and it's like, why wasn't Rowan Atkinson cast in this fucking role? Like,
if only.
I know they needed
Rowan
like an
Atkinson
older
as
guy.
Robert De Niro's character would have been better.
You know what? Why wasn't it just Terry Gilliam? Does that not feel like I can see? I mean, look,
because directing and acting at the same time is hard.
Yeah, but he did it in Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yeah, and then he was like, I don't want to do that again.
Fair. But to be fair, it was literally 2 scenes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, well, and look, like, I think if it were more, it would have been a real problem. But
Yeah.
Robert De Niro is like, I don't know, like, that was the one thing I had heard about this movie, that De Niro was in it. And I had some book as a kid that had this movie in it. And I remember seeing a picture of like Jonathan Pryce and Robert De Niro, and I was like, what the fuck? Because all I knew Jonathan Pryce from at the time was Evita, because he plays Juan Perón in that.
Yeah.
The man is a good actor, but in terms of singing,
No.
not great. I mean, he's okay. I know he's in M Butterfly. I think he's a stage actor, so I know he has the chops, but it's just Evita. I mean, look, that movie has its own problems, but that's what I had known him from. So seeing him play this like very different character, I really like him in this movie more than anything else. Like that's the big takeaway. But I mean, there is a lot of just like weird. Like the Jim Broadbent character is weird. The Jim Broadbent character is just bizarre beyond. Bob Hoskins is in the movie for like 2 seconds is what it feels like.
Blink and you miss him.
Yeah.
Blink and he goes to the Super Mario movie.
Well, he's also, I mean, at one point he's dressed up like Mario.
He went through the ducts.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is there is a little bit of a DNA line you can draw between this movie and the Mario movie, because the sets look similar.
Exactly.
They're drawing on that, like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it steampunk, but it's like Metropolis. It's that 1984 dystopia. Like, I don't know how else to describe it, but with like a heavy helping of
upscale sewer.
like Metropolis, like what's that? Like Art Deco-ish. Like there's a little like that shot of the angel in this movie, the statue that says like, may the truth make you free, or whatever nightmarish authoritarian shit they came up with. Like that's very Art Deco-y, but it's like I love that about this movie, that it has this like really defined style, because it does feel like it obviously influences other things, but it's obviously influenced by other things as well. Because again, if a 1984 doesn't exist, and if that movie doesn't exist, this movie doesn't exist the way that it does. Because this is like a lot, in a lot of ways, like in response to that, but in response in a way that I think does a better job in telling a more impactful story, because of the dream sequence, almost entirely. Because we don't see that in 1984. It just ends, and we're like, I don't know what happened. I mean, we know what happened, but we never get to hear him really say what happened, because that's not the point.
Right. And honestly, the whole dream sequence kind of humanizes the character a lot more, in my opinion, because it's like, no, that makes him like us with hopes, dreams, aspirations that seems so mythical that you could never reach it, even if it's just like, in his case, it wasn't getting a promotion because he was being handed those things, but it was just, a freedom from the vicious cycle, which mood. But I can appreciate the dream sequence because, reading 1984 with 0 dream sequences it's stark. It truly is.
Winston goes to work. Winston goes home.
I mean, it's heavy hitting for that reason. That is why it's a pivotal thing. It doesn't really look away from the uncomfortable conversation, where Brazil also doesn't. It just kind of makes it a little bit more digestible by small measure, but whether it's really dark humor or whether it's just something simple like, no, this character is propelled by this fantasy, period. And that's essentially what makes him like go after the girl in the apartment. It's all being that cycle of, no, but this is part of my dream.
Right.
Kim Greased, I feel like is not a low point of the movie, but not a point at all, because she's not great in the movie. Yeah. And I know Terry Gilliam was like not a fan, and he cut out a lot of her stuff, and he was dissatisfied with her performance, which I mean, okay.
Could you imagine though? Like,
pretty rough. I mean,
Terry Gilliam's like, I hate your acting so much, I'm gonna cut you out, cut your shit out of the movie, and you're like a predominant character in the movie.
I'll take the lobotomy, please.
Yeah.
She's not she hasn't been in a lot of stuff. And the thing I remember her from is Homeward Bound, because I think she plays like the mom in Homeward Bound of the like the mom of the family. But she's not great here. And like looking at the like Ellen Barkin was on that list of names, and like I mean, look, Ellen Barkin similarly not. I mean, I think she's fine in Buckaroo Banzai, but she has a weird career. As well.
You named Buckaroo Banzai.
Look, I love that movie, but
I know
it's as weird as this movie in a lot of ways, a lot more uplifting. But similarly, a character actor being given top billing.
Yes.
But the person whose name really stands out from that list of people is Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh man,
because like it would have been a different movie.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But I think it might have worked because those moments of strength would have felt like they had some weight to them.
Yeah. And I think that Jamie Lee Curtis and Jonathan Pryce would have had good chemistry with each other.
Yeah.
I think they've been able to play off each other, especially like, you know, given her like role in Fish Called Wanda and things like that. We know that she can carry
Trading Places,
that she can carry, you know, a kind of weirdly comedic role.
Academy Award-winning actress Jamie Lee Curtis.
You bet your ass.
Speaking of carrying it
exactly carrying a weird ass role.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like honestly, the weakest point of this movie for me is the Jill Kim Greist character. She is unremarkable from the moment you meet her to the moment she's unceremoniously written out of the movie off screen, which I'm not complaining about, because that makes perfect sense, because that is more or less exactly what happens in 1984.
Yeah, that's the tone.
But it was scarier in 1984 because you ultimately knew.
You felt the absence.
Yeah, you felt the absence.
Right, exactly.
That person was in this movie. Shit, I didn't even realize they were on that.
Right. And that's, I mean, ultimately, that's the core of the problem. And that's the thing that makes the Love Conquers. Bye Conquers. It would have been a better title. The Love Conquers All version ultimately succeeds even less or fails even harder because there is no chemistry between the two leads in the movie.
Yeah.
It's like, how the fuck were you going to hinge the entire movie on this? Because, like, I don't have any attachment to their relationship.
No.
And I'm, you know what? If he ends up lobotomized or has lost his mind at the end of the movie or whatever ends up happening, like, that's more of a shame that it happens to him, not because he can't be with her, because there's no anything.
Yeah, It just sucks. Like, oh, yeah, that's a really shitty thing.
Right. But it's like, it's not because he can't be with the love of his life, because the most convincing that she is in those dream sequences.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, agreed.
I'm waiting for you to build that costume, Maggie.
Dude, trust me, I so fucking want to real
and then
bad.
Fly around.
Yeah, if I could have my metallic armor with my little cellophane wings, you bet your ass I'm going to be launching between buildings, just hoping to come across a samurai to beat down, only to realize it was myself.
It was me all along. I love the armor when he's flying through the air, but when he lands and is on the ground, it looks kind of dorky.
I know they did their best with the design. I like that you get the pared down wings and like this tight V, which once again very indicative of the Deco movement. But it's so funky, and him with the tight curly cherubic hair. It cracks. And also, shout out to the special effects and makeup department for this. I still can't get over the scene that like drew me to in the first place, which was seeing Sam's mom for the first time getting her like face full force wrenched back. It was so convincing. I still love it every fucking time.
That is the scene that I saw out of context.
Yeah, that if you think you've heard of Brazil, that's probably the thing that you saw. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
a still or a clip of a woman whose just face is being stretched to the limits.
And it ultimately has nothing to do with the plot. Like,
no, it's just to illustrate the classism right there.
Right. Yeah. Just to drive home just how absurd the absurdly rich have become.
Yeah.
I love Katherine Hellman in this movie. She's great. Like it's a shame anytime we have to see anything else, any of the other female characters, even the friend that's like turning to goo.
Yes.
Like it's because they're fucking great. And like it's a shame. Even the Shirley character is so good. It's like just get everything else out of the movie. We don't need it. He could just to be lobotomized for any other reason. Like he really could.
I would love to propose going around and just what was our favorite moment of the movie, because it just gets me pumped. There's so many good like vignettes of absurdity that it just makes my fucking day. Like mine still is the fucking bathroom scene where he has refused the promotion and then kind of doubles back on it. But he meets the boss and he asks him to do a favor. And so he's just hoisting him at the fucking urinal. And it's just so perfectly rich person that I just really love it. Just knowing that the most powerful person that has your fate in their hands, like, cannot even take a piss.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, overall, I like any scene that's just demonstrating how stupidly rich people have just completely lost all senses of being able to function as a human being with other human beings.
I was going to say my favorite scene in the movie is when Jonathan Pryce goes to find, essentially he's looking for, the guy who killed Mr. Buttle. And it turns out it's his friend played by Michael Palin, who I think he's probably the best part of this movie, because Michael Palin plays a literal sociopath, murdering psychotic fuck in a way that is the exact way that 1984 essentially lays out for you, that this is somebody's job and they're just doing it. And the scene where he's like, well, he was delivered to me in good faith, so it's not my fault, it's their fault. It's that like fucking bureaucratic hand washing.
Yes.
But if you watched any other scene in this movie, like it's just reinforcing the microcosm that is that scene, because then you have the absurdist or surrealist fact that he's covered in blood talking about these very mundane things. And then you realize his daughter is in the room with him this whole time. And it's like, my fucking God. Because they're like sharing a wall with what's essentially this torture silo from hell.
Yeah. Right.
And like Michael Palin, for me, is as good as Jonathan Pryce is. Michael Palin, when he's in the movie, everybody has met someone like this. And if you have not met this person, you may be this person, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But in this case, he's just someone doing his job. He's doing it really well. It just happens that his job is literally torturing people to death.
Right.
Correct.
or lobotomizing them or again, because we're not sure really what's going on. We're not about as sure what's going on as much as in 1984, which is they are dissidents of some form or fashion.
Right.
Correct.
Something bad is happening to you and you're not coming back. Right.
And Mr. Buttle, or it should have been Mr. Tuttle, was a terrorist. Well, Mr. Tuttle is Robert De Niro, and he's a terrorist, but Mr. Buttle is just a guy who was tortured too much and had a heart attack and died.
The same day that he was captured.
Right. It's again, there is that moment in 1984 where you realize like, oh, he's going to be tortured, and it's going to be this rat thing that they put on his face and it's horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually say that this goes further than 1984, because in 1984, I mean, he breaks mentally, but he essentially goes like, no, you're right. I'm going to follow whatever it is that you want. And you've broken me mentally. Like in this, it's almost reverse 1984. He's not broken. I mean, he is broken mentally, but he realizes the same thing that so many people realize, which is ultimately the one place they cannot take away from you is your mind.
Right.
Bingo.
Twittering moron in the corner, but
yeah, instead of succumbing to, like, fine, I'll conform, I'll fall in line, it's a nope, bye, peace out.
I'm going to Brazil.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, it's a different message than 1984, but I think it's kind of it's the counterpoint, I guess. It's the same story, but with a different outcome. And it doesn't deserve a happy ending, fuck's sake, because that was not earned. That was never on the table and whatever.
Oh,
It's
But
crazy to me.
It is still a better ending than 1984 offered. I'd say that's better than Conforming. It's tragic, but, he didn't sacrifice himself, at least.
And that's the thing. You mentioned it. It's tragic, but it's tragic in a different way. Because, like, ultimately, he's in his own mind. So if that's good enough for him,
Right.
I know. That's
what are you supposed to do?
So he found escapism, and Godspeed.
Right. I do like the shot, though, of Michael Palin and Peter Vaughn coming into frame. Because if you're not expecting it, it's
out of the blue.
Yeah, I mean, Terry Gilliam, I feel like Terry Gilliam does a good enough job in making the last 20 minutes seem like unreality enough where you're like, something is not real here.
Yep.
But like that is a very like quick moment. Like it's very abrupt and you're just like, whoa, they're just standing there.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely an earned ending. And by the end of it, I was like, okay, like him singing Brazil to himself in this room is, I think, the only way that this could really end.
Right. After everything that has happened.
Right. It reinforces your place in the world in a really unfortunate and again, like obviously very intentional, but if you want to watch something that's going to make you feel good, well, I would say definitely don't watch 1984. I'm not going to say watch fucking Brazil either, because it's not an uplifting tale by any stretch of the imagination either. It's as big of a downer as 1984 is. It's just, again, like it's given that little twist of he's in his mind at least. I mean, I guess you could make the case in 1984 he's probably in his mind too.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I read 1984.
I mean, they don't say outright, but you know what I mean? Right. Like you could just say like, okay, he is. But here, yeah, I feel like if you give this a positive ending, it completely changes the point of even making this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that to me is a very, again, like I know that it was obviously a big deal then. It's still kind of a big deal now. And sometimes the director doesn't make a choice unnecessarily. I mean, we can talk about director's cuts all day, and Ridley Scott and George Lucas and all these people who go back and redo things and make decisions that we have problems with. But I think Terry Gilliam doing what he did, I think this movie is, again, understandably, I feel like when someone says this is Terry Gilliam's best movie, I would say I don't think I need to see all of his movies to agree at this point. It's not my favorite, but in terms of a cohesive message that is timeless, because 1984 is timeless, this is just as timeless, if not more timeless, I think.
Right.
Then yeah. Like, and look, everybody loves a good twist, frankly. You know, like that elevates this above 1984, I think, narratively, just enough on its own that it does have a little bit of kind of like a gotcha moment. But it's a moment that it makes you think. And I think it also allows Terry Gilliam to really lean on we've mentioned, the unreality and, him disappearing into the papers and then fighting the samurai and it being himself. You can't do any of that in the last 20 minutes of the movie unless it's all in his mind, because otherwise it makes no fucking sense, because there is a level of reality going on here, even if it is strange.
It's not completely ungrounded, like
the thing in the restaurant with that food,
right?
Ugh.
Jesus Christ, which is just, but like that's taking place in reality, like that's not there's nothing there that would make you think like, oh, this is a dream sequence. So that's why at the end, Terry Gilliam really has to like ramp it up, which I think works. I mean, again, when you have all these really weird things happening in the last 20 minutes, it doesn't feel out of place, but the level it goes to, it does.
Yes, which is it's the perfect leveling up, because I mean, the reason why satire is so fun, and same with like, I guess, sci-fi in one coin, is because it either magnifies what's going on in the present, or it's like indicating where it is leading. And I love that Brazil just opens up with like, there's always bombing, so much so that you can carry on work, easy peasy. And it's like, after going through the pandemic and everything like that, that it is just as bizarre. So for Terry Gilliam to make somebody say, yeah, we didn't know it was a dream sequence until X, Y, and Z happened to realize just how absurd their world was set up as. It's very clever. I do enjoy that, and it just kind of puts the mirror up to what we're going through currently, just to reiterate that it is a timeless factor, because this stuff will always be relevant. There will always be the bigger machine.
And the classism is, I mean, like you mentioned, that the idea that in this restaurant there's a terrorist attack and they just put up this shade, and it's like that's good enough. And not only is it good enough, it's expected.
Normal. Yeah.
It's actually like that again. Like, you don't even have to say anything, and you're getting across so many points, and you're putting through so many ideas. Like and that I think is the actual success of Terry Gilliam as a filmmaker and as a writer filmmaker, because he's credited on this. Yes, it is George Orwell effectively adjacent, but his name's on it.
Yeah, right. Excellent adaptation.
Yeah, and the same goes for essentially most things he's directed. He's either has a hand in the screenplay, or he shares it with somebody. Like, I'm pretty sure he is one of the names on the adaptation for Fear and Loathing. Yeah, it's and that's the thing. Well, I mean, you know what you're going to get with Terry Gilliam. That's a good and a bad thing, however you want to look at it. But maybe one of these days I'll get around to watching 12 Monkeys.
Okay. Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, I like it. It's fine.
It was a worthy watch. I will say that much. I don't think it quite stacks up in the way that Time Bandits would, or any like of the other ones, but it's still worth a watch. I'd say take a goose and a gander, but this is the crown jewel you just witnessed. So,
he's a director who, in the 80s, like, that was the time and the place for a guy like this to really excel, right? Like, something about Terry Gilliam and the 80s just feels like hand in. I'm not saying his stuff in the 90s isn't good, because fucking Fear and Loathing is from 98.
Yeah, 98.
So, but I mean, I would say post Fear and Loathing, the stuff that's come out, I'm not sure anybody's been rushing out to see.
Yeah.
The Man Who Killed Don Quixote finally came out in 2018. And I would be remiss to think that I'm not the only one who forgot it actually did, in fact, come out.
Because it was the will they, won't they of a fucking century. And it was like, it sounded like such a keen idea. But the fact that we kept getting release dates and it kept getting moved, it's like, never mind then.
Yeah, I maybe one of these days we'll get around to watching it. Just like I would love to watch the Christoph Waltz movie that he did with Christoph Waltz in like a bald cap the entire movie, The Zero Theorem. Looked interesting, And I think he was wasn't Terry Gilliam also was the one to work with Heath Ledger last.
Yeah.
That Imaginary. Yeah.
Yeah, the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, guys.
Yeah. But, like, I think for me, like, past Fear and Loathing, it's like I haven't seen enough to really have a comment on modern day Terry Gilliam. But this movie, now I've seen it and I get it, and I can 100% understand why its praises are sung as highly as they are. So
yeah,
and I see why Jonathan Pryce is in stuff now. It's like because he was in this, for fuck's sake.
Right.
Yeah, it's fun, but I mean, again, as fun as something like this can ultimately be, which is,
I mean, yeah, it's the yay boo of the century. It's a very pretty apocalyptic area.
Yeah, not a future I would like to live in. Let's put it that way. But I guess not one that we're not already in. So.
I was about to say any of the apartment fucking scenes. It's like,
You mean if I call and ask for something to be fixed, they'll never fix it?
Yeah.
Really? That actually happens?
Whoa. The only thing that would be more realistic is if they raised rent.
Right. I will say this movie's miniature game is on point, because those Robert De Niro miniatures.
Right?
Oh, I remember those little toys with the little toy soldier parachute toys from when I was a kid. That's what that looked like.
Cool.
Yes.
It's like, oh my God, Terry Gilliam, what the fuck, man? Like, there he goes. All right, over the edge, sure.
Just let him do whatever, man. He'll burn himself out.
Yeah. So Jess, final thoughts on Brazil?
I mean, like I said at the beginning, Brazil is one of the, if you're a movie fan, you're a Terry Gilliam fan, you've seen the stills with the stretched out face and all of that, it's definitely worth a watch. I would agree that it's a much more fun version of 1984 to watch than the previous film adaptation. And yeah, it's not my favorite Terry Gilliam, but it's an interesting cinematic experience that will never be recreated in any way.
About you, Maggie?
If you assholes are willing to sit through 3 hours of Oppenheimer and not Brazil, I am going to smack you in the face. Just throwing that out there. Also, John Hurt was good in 1984. I'd say watch that version if you want a nice compare contrast.
It's just very depressing.
It is, but you know what? Sometimes it's good to feel the company of misery when it's, entertainment and not fellow humans. But it's a wonderful piece. It's a very approachable art piece, I should say. A lot of art films get shat on because they are out there and wild, but this is a nice little foot in the door experience. So I don't know. It's worth it for the visuals alone, but the story still holds up.
I agree with both of y'all 100%. I mean, obviously, it's not a fun story, but it's a story that deserves a more exciting retelling. And that's what Brazil is. I mean, it's just in 1984 with some fun.
With some zazz.
As much fun as a movie about fucking genocide and other things can be.
Right.
Yeah.
But, again, you've got Jonathan Pryce, you've got Terry Gilliam, you've got Art Deco, you've got a large amount of practical effects. So all good things, all great things, all things that, again, yield a movie that's mentioned not only in the best of the year that it came out, but in a lot of conversations for one of the best movies ever made. So, in terms of timeless story, in terms of set design, in terms of actors, yeah, I would agree. It's probably up there with some of the better movies ever made.
Yeah.
And to Maggie's point, John Hurt is pretty good in 1984, given that I never got to talk about it. But that movie is, if you want a real fun time, like it's like being punched repeatedly in the fucking face and then told, well, that didn't actually happen. So yeah, yes. it's not, and there's no Equilibrium-esque moment where the good guy gets to get one over on the baddies. There's none of that. No. And that's unfortunately, American filmmaking is wanting to make everything a happy ending. And boy, this movie gets put into that camp of things that almost didn't end up as good as they ultimately were. And that's the other thing. This movie is a good movie, but it's also a good story about, artists putting one over on big studios, which, as we know, shockingly is happening once again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As timeless a story as ever, folks, for fuck's sake. So, on that note, let's take a break and we'll play a preview for the next Culture Cast and the first Culture Cast of August.
Few films have ever created this much anticipation. Believe everything you've heard, because nothing can prepare you for the ending of Angel Heart.
Are you afraid?
Yeah, I'm afraid.
Mickey Rourke, Robert De Niro, Lisa Bonet. Angel Heart, rated R.
Starts Friday at a theater near you.
That's right. In August, we're going to be talking about Michael Rourke, otherwise known as Mickey Rourke. We're going to be talking about Mickey Rourke. You're talking about Angel Heart, Barfly, Johnny Handsome, A Prayer for the Dying, and Year of the Dragon. Guess what? I've seen none of those movies.
Okay, have fun.
Angel Heart? I like Angel Heart. You should watch 9.5 Weeks.
I just like how you slowly let Barfly out afterwards. So it was like Angel Heart Barf, like right out the rib. I'm like, wow. So you enjoy that angel hair barf art.
Hey, you know what? I have seen none of these movies. All I know is Mickey Rourke's time was before I was probably born. So
yeah.
Yep. So we'll be joined on the Angel Heart episode by Father Malone and El Goro and Heather Drain. And then actually, speaking of you, Jess, you'll be joining me on the Barfly episode. So yeah, Bukowski, everybody. I love artists who beat women. I mean, hey, I'm not complaining. He wrote some good stuff, but don't beat women.
Still Bukowski.
Don't beat women, bro, but too late. So until then, Jess, where could people find you if they want to find your things that you're working.
You can find me on Instagram at WriterJustFired. Pretty much everything I do gets filtered there in some capacity.
What about you, Maggie?
Well, apparently I'm going to be slapping people outside of Oppenheimer if they haven't watched Brazil. But otherwise, you can find me at my, website, dolinmuseum.com, DOLIN museum, however the hell you spell that.com.
MUSEUM.
I thought you were asking about the Dolan part, not the museum part, but
yeah. That's a lot to remember, man. My spiel is not tight. I'm over my 5-minute. It's bad. And you can also find me on Instagram, Dolan Museum. There you are, folks.
You should change your Instagram handle to Slappenheimer.
And yes, Slappenheimer. It's Brazilian time.
I'm gonna Slappenheimer you if you talk about Oppenheimer and Barbie or Barbieheimer, whatever, folks. Who cares?
Barbrazil.
Yeah, now it's gonna be a thing. It's gonna be all these other movies that are gonna be tied together because it happened one time organically, and now it's gonna happen a bunch of times.
It's like the couples.
It's not. It only worked once because it didn't need to ever work to begin with.
Right.
Isn't that funny?
No, what a hoot.
Yeah, I know. Hey, we try to corporatize everything. And that's the point of Brazil, folks. You can find me and everything I work on at weirdingwaymedia.com. Speaking of corporatizing things, that's where you can find all the podcasts that we work on, including this show and Scary Stories We Tell and Bollywood Cinema Club and all the things that I do and that I've done with y'all. So yeah, culturecast.com, patreon.com/culturecast, things that you can do, places you can go to donate. Thank you to you if you are donating. If you're not, just rate and review the show wherever you get it. Maggie, Jess, thank you both so much for joining me. Jess, thank you for programming the month and doing a good job as well.
No problem.
4 good movies in a row.
Ow.
I mean, hey, I'm glad it wasn't 4 bad movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could just watch Cool World 4 episodes in a row. You guys remember we did an episode on that a long time ago?
Yeah, it was Bakshi month. I was thrilled, all right?
Yeah, that was a real
Cool World.
No one is. It's Cool World.
That was a real high point of that month, as they would say. So
I was definitely high at a point.
yeah. But on that note, we'll catch you on the next episode.